All right, everybody. Welcome. I know it's a little early, but hey, look, for those of you who have a 9:30 BME seminar, this gets you ready. You won't be late. Okay. So you got 10 minutes to get there. Well, a little bit early because usually I might let you go a little bit early. All right. So first lecture. And like I mentioned on Tuesday, my goal here is that I'm presuming the reason you're here, most of you here as graduate students, is because you didn't take physiology as an undergrad. Most of you do not have a bio background, which is fine. But my job is to introduce you to physiology. Now, as I mentioned on Tuesday, my goal is to just introduce you. It's a broad field, it's an ever growing field, believe it or not. But the things that I will be talking to you are pretty much been established science for some decades. But I will throw in some new stuff because there's new things discovered all the time. Or maybe some things that we thought were real some time ago are now being displaced by new information. That's the field of science. So what I want to do is this, since all of us come with minimal background, that's why I'm doing these introductions. So this is what I intend for you to get out of this particular lecture series is I'm going to introduce physiology. What is it, especially compared to anatomy, and how the two are intertwined and they can't technically be separated. And then I'm going to do an overview of physiological control systems because basically that's what physiology is. It's nothing but control systems. Okay. And I will also I will introduce cell biology. Okay. This is not going to be an exhaustive venue. No, I'm just going to go over some broad areas and then I'm going to focus on the plasma membrane, which is the boundary layer that defines an individual cell and how this is essential to understand what its constituents are and then how this relates to transport, etc., because this is everything for physiology. We can't even start to move into, well, we can't even talk about membrane potential. This is the charge potential across a membrane. We need to understand transport. What is the nature of plasma membrane before we can talk about that? And we can't talk about the nervous system unless we understand where membrane potential comes from. Okay? Because what neural communication, at least the electrical aspects of that, is just the flow of charges across that membrane. And what enables that flow is a membrane potential, a charge difference across that membrane. So when we finish these introductory lectures, you will have a brief introduction. Okay, now for some of you, depending on your relative background, some of this material is like, God, this is boring. I already know this. Some of you will think, whoa, you'll be challenged to integrate some of this information. But it's critical for us to start with these introductory lectures before we proceed to the individual systems, right? So, definitions. I'm going to be pretty brief here. Anatomy and physiology. If you were in medical school, the first class you're going to take is anatomy, anatomy and biochemistry. Okay? So anatomy is basically the body parts, right? Now, you need to understand those are the parts, but then physiology is how they work. Okay? So technically, you can't separate the two. If you were to look at a traditional anatomy textbook, I'm not talking about Gray's Anatomy, it's not a textbook, it's an illustration of body parts. That's all it is. But if you look at a traditional anatomy textbook, you will say, well, wait a minute, this isn't that different from a physiological textbook. Physiology. That's because you can't really talk about one without understanding the other. Okay? Because one is the parts and the other is how they work together. All right. So here at CMU, well, traditionally, you would have anatomy before you take physiology. We can't afford it. We can't do that here. I've been pushing for longer than you guys have been alive for anatomy to be taught here. Okay. It's never going to be taught here as a cadaver. having a human cadaver, no. However, there are digital versions that we could use, but they tend to be rather expensive and just isn't going to happen. Maybe one of these years, but not right now. So I will only introduce you to anatomy necessary for us to proceed to a discussion about physiology. So I'm not going to ask you to memorize all 200 and some odd bones in the body, or for that matter, skeletal muscles. But those that are specifically going to be used as examples, I will. For instance, I will talk about the humerus, that's this bone in your upper arm, your radius, the ulna, the bones in the forearm, and then basically how they join here in an elbow, right? Then we'll talk about this muscle here, which is your bicep. The one back here is your triceps. So how do you lift your forearm? Okay, we'll talk about nervous stimulation that induces contraction of this biceps. This bicep muscle then will be induced to contract or shorten. If I can create enough contractile force to overcome the weight resistance of my forearm, what happens? This muscle shortens. Since it is inserted here on my radius, that means that's going to lift up my forearm. But you need to understand the anatomy of this arm before you can understand basically how that works. It's basically a lever. All right. So that's the integration between anatomy and physiology. Again, this class is in physiology, but you will have to learn a little bit of anatomy. Okay. Now, let's go to a little bit more detail between the two. So anatomy, again, this is form. These are the parts. All right. Now, generally speaking, traditionally over thousands of years, it's been by observation. And this means the surface, because you don't have X-ray vision. You can't see through a three-dimensional tissue. You can't, if you see you're looking at your hand, you can't see through your hand, but you can look at the surface. So if I want to look at organs in the body, I have to do dissection. So that means a cadaver, opening it up, where I can expose those internalized tissues. And then, of course, I dissect the heart to be able to see the chambers of the heart, etc. All right. But these are focused on what I can see. Right. Now, there's another concept I want to introduce, which is called comparative anatomy. That refers to comparisons of human anatomy to various animals. Right. Now, this class focuses on human physiology and i.e. human anatomy. However, there's a lot to learn. If you contrast what works for you, how does that work for something else, right? So there will be instances throughout the semester, especially when we're talking about comparative physiology, or in this case, anatomy. For instance, when I'm talking about digestion, you are what is called a monogastric organism. That means you have a single stomach, okay? Everyone's got a stomach. However, that also means that there are certain things that you can't digest. You can go out there and eat some grass, eat all you want. It doesn't matter. You'll get no nutritional value. Your body is not designed to break down grass so that you can get anything from it, all right? So what about deer? We got deer here on campus. They eat grass. They can no more digest grass than you can. However, they have a different digestive system. They have a stomach just like you, but before the stuff, that grass gets to the stomach, it goes to this first huge, large compartment called a rumen. This rumen is a big micro vat, but it's a fermentation vat filled with bacteria and fungi and viruses. And basically, the deer munch on the grass, they swallow the grass goes into the rumen, the microorganisms now can break down that grass. During this process, they will release fatty acids and other nutrients, which then can be digested by the deer, right? So even though the deer can no more digest grass than you can, this symbiosis with these microorganisms means that he can take advantage of that. Okay, both people win. I mean, the microorganisms can't go around eating grass. They're dependent upon the deer to provide them with the grass, but then they provide a benefit to the deer. All right. So basically, all this, going back to anatomy, these visual components this is gross anatomy. All right. Now, if I want to, I can use other visual means so that I can actually see through. So we can talk about X-rays, CT, we can any number of visualization processes that I can allows me to see within a dense tissue. All right, or I can make little sections and look at histological samples. But so I can look into these tissues. Okay, so that'd be histological analysis. Okay, so all of this is this. Now we can also do a physical examination. What the heck is that? So I give this example here. This woman has got, a young woman has her arm stuck up a bum of a cow. Why? This is the wrong audience. I mean, I come from agriculture. I actually taught a course where you would do something like this. What is she doing? Why she got her hand stuck up the butt of that cow? She's actually palpating the ovaries of that cow. So through the rectal wall, she can actually touch and palpate the ovaries. Why does she want to do that? She wants to determine what is the estrus cycle. In other words, has that cow released a fertile egg? Why does she care about that? Because this is a dairy cow. In this country, almost all dairy cows are inseminated not by a bull directly, but by a straw containing semen from a bull, artificial insemination. Okay? So the question is, when does the farmer inseminate the animal? It needs to know, is there an egg? Because it's a waste, a lot of money. So this is one way at which you can assess that that animal is now available, has an egg that can receive those sperm. All right. But the whole point of this is just an example of a physical examination. It's the same thing when you go to your physician and he starts, he'll stand behind you, and he'll start palpating your around your throat and so forth. And so that's a physical examination. That is also anatomy too, because they're trying to feel what's right, what's wrong. Okay. Physiology, again, one anatomy is form. This is function. All right. So again, this is how all the body parts work, not only individually, but how they're all integrated to make you, you. All right. So you can't really separate anatomy and physiology. You got the parts. How do they work? Now, the next thing for these introductory slides, I'm going to move along various subject matters. And they're just going to be, we'll talk about this, we'll talk about that, we'll talk about this. Now, I'm not going to go into molecular biology. I'm not going to an extensive discussion about nucleic acids. Not that they're not critically important, but I only have so much time. So the next thing I want to talk about are three critical, basic, underlying concepts for physiology. The first one is going to be the hierarchy of structural organization. The second is complementarity of structure and function. And finally, homeostasis. So let me take them in turn. So, hierarchy of structural organization. So, you are a composite of about 75 trillion cells, right? Each of those cells has constituents, parts, that can actually we can get down to the molecular atomic level, right? So you, in this class, you need to become familiar and be able to go back and forth, not only from, say, the smallest functional living unit, a cell, but from a cell to a tissue, to an organ system, then how these organ systems integrate to make you, you, and then go back the other way, all right? So most of you are engineers. What are you trained? You're trained as a reductionist. We have a complex problem. We simplify that problem so we can understand it. All right. However, and that's fine because that's logical, it makes sense, but never forget that you have to go, you solve this little problem, but how does that integrate into the larger picture? So you have to be able to go back and forth, which is somewhat unique for physiology. Okay. So when I discuss a system, for instance, the first system we're going to discuss is the nervous system. I will start with the smallest functional living unit, the cell, a neuron. I will discuss what's unique about that neuron compared to other cell types in the body. What enables that to be capable of electrical communication. It's unique to that cell type. Right? So we need to talk about those cells. Then we need to talk about how those cells communicate with each other. Then how those then communicate to other systems and so on. So that is where we're getting into this here. Right? Now, complementarity of structure and function. So the form enables function, and the function is enabled by form. All right. So basically, give you a couple examples. So bones are internal support structures of the body. Everyone thinks about that. They're much more than that, as you will discover when we get into the skeletal system. But focusing on what do? They allow me to stand up in front of you because without my bones, I would just be this gelatinous mass here. Everybody knows what an octopus is, right? So an octopus in the water, the buoyancy of you have this beautiful, elegant, three-dimensional structure, arms moving around like this. You bring one out and put him on top of the boat, what happens? It just can crawl along, all right? That would be you without bones, right? So what enables those bones is they have to have a certain rigidity, but plasticity, okay? Now, that means that, so that type of anatomy or structure enables the function of bone. Okay, that's example number one. Example number two, when we get to the circulatory system, we will talk about your heart. Your heart has 4 valves, and they're designed to ensure unidirectional flow. If you're a plumber, I know there are no plumbers here. I was a pipeline testing engineer many decades ago. It's a glorified plumber. But basically, what that means is you have something called a check valve, which ensures unidirectional flow. All right, so why do you want these valves in the heart? So every time it beats, it contracts, it will then induce the contraction of a couple of chambers of the heart. We'll get into the details later. That forces blood out of the heart. All right, so then it contracts. Now when it releases, the whole point of the valves are to keep the blood that has been just now released into the circulatory system from coming back into the heart. So it ensures that blood is coming from it is moving in a single direction, because that's the way the blood is circulating in your body. It has to circulate in a single direction, okay, in order to ensure efficient delivery. So these are examples of complementarity of structure and function. Now, one of the most important concepts of physiology is the term homeostasis, okay? This is the basis of physiology. So basically, it simply means, grossly speaking, unchanging, but as opposed to an on-off light switch. So I put the switch on, that closes an electrical circuit, the lights come on. I turn it off, they're off. It's on, off. This is not homeostasis. Homeostasis is that you're maintaining a variable in a state of dynamic equilibrium. So, for instance, that could be any number of physiological functions. That could be respiration rate, that could be blood pressure, that could be heartbeats, that could be the level of glucose in your blood, oxygen, CO2. It doesn't matter. Any of these are all variables. They're controlled within your body. However, what I'm saying is they're maintained within a specific range, and that's the dynamic equilibrium. So giving you, and I'll go in more detail later, we're in this room. There's an HVAC system which maintains temperature. Okay. Now, right now we're in the summer mode. So we have an air conditioning unit. And what happens is there's a thermostat. When that temperature rises above the preset temperature that's put in there, it will induce the air conditioning to come on. The air conditioning will come on, the cold air be released, and then eventually the temperature drops down, preset value, it turns off. Basically the way that HVAC system works in the summertime. All right? Now, that means that the temperature in this room is not held at a constant, like, say, 68. It's going to be 68 plus or minus, maybe a half a degree or a degree, because there's delays and inefficiencies. Okay, because the thermostat, there's a delay between the thermostat recognizing a change, and then that getting translated to the air conditioning unit, that coming on, there's a delay to get the temperature down below. So that's why you have this dynamic equilibrium. Okay, and the same thing works in your body. Right? So we will go into more detail, but this is a critical concept. Without homeostasis, you wouldn't be you. Okay? Now, another way to think about it is this. All of the cells in your body are organized into tissues, organs, organ systems. And why is that? Why is that? In order to maintain homeostasis of various variables that are life critical for you. So we have cells, they make body systems. These body systems enable homeostasis, and that allows for the continuation of living of these cells, and i.e., you continue to survive. Right? So let's kind of take a break here. And what are the requirements for you to be you, alive? All right. Let's think in terms of life functions. All right. So the first one, maintaining boundaries. All right. You have all kinds of boundaries in your body. The biggest one is your integument, your skin. So everything outside is outside of the body. Everything in is in your body. Right. So that defines you among all the rest of the world. Now, we get down to a cell level. Each cell is defined by a plasma membrane, which separates it from everything else. You have inside, you have outside, intracellular, extracellular, right? So boundaries are critical. They're also critical. For instance, you have your vascularization. You have a blood vessel. The blood is contained on the inside, not the outside. All right. So boundaries are critical. Second concept, movement. We're animals. One of the definitions of an animal, it has the capability of movement. Right. So and that is necessary. I'm standing, walking across in front of you, lecturing. I'm talking to you. I'm moving my hands, my arms. I'm movement. Right. Responsiveness. This is when we're going to get to the nervous system. You sense your environment. Your eyes see, your ears hear, your nose smells, your hand fingertips touch, right? So you will be provided with stimulation. Your body senses that stimulation and can act on it. So this is irritability or responsiveness. Next, digestion. Hey, you got to keep all those 75 trillion cells alive, which means you need to provide nutrients. You need to provide oxygen. You need to remove waste materials. You need communication. Right? So digestion means that, well, wait a minute, you're not a self-contained organism. That means that you have, the cells in your body are undergoing metabolism. That means they're utilizing molecules to make energy molecules. That means the source has to go from someplace else outside your body. So that's why you ingest food. Now, the food you ingest, I don't care if you're a vegetarian, a carnivore, or anything in between. You eat something. You consume something. The food that you consume, number one, is not sterile. And number two, it is not readily, under most instances, it is not readily absorbable by your gastrointestinal tract. I don't care if you're eating a soy burger or a meat burger or a combination, it doesn't matter. So you're eating something that is rather complex. It consists of protein and carbohydrates and fats, fibers, etc., etc. You consume that. The role of your digestive system is to break that down by a combination of mechanical and chemical processes such that it will be broken down to constituent molecules that are compatible for absorption into your body. These form the building blocks to make more cells, to maintain cells, to create energy. All right? So digestion. Now, when you eat food, not all of that food, you do not have, the food you eat is not 100% digestible. Okay? All right? That isn't digestion has to be excreted in the form of, in the digestion feces, in the term of liquids, you would be urine. So that's excretion. So just as important as it is to acquire stuff, you need to get rid of stuff. So that's the excretion. Now let's drop down to the bottom, and that's growth. Every one of you began life as a fertilized ovum, a single cell organism. 75 trillion of you now. How did you get from there to here? You were born. I mean, yeah, huge growth, birth weight difference. Some of you may have been a little petite 5-pound baby. Some of you have been a big honking 13-pound baby. And then everything in between. All of you are a lot bigger than that now. How did you get there? Growth. So that single cell became 75 trillion cells. And you will continue, cells will die in your body. They have to be replaced by other cells in the body. But there's constant growth. Okay? Now, the last thing I'll talk about is reproduction. Everything I have talked about to this point are critical life functions for everyone in this room, right? For the individual of a species, these are necessary life functions. Now, reproduction, on the other hand, is not a necessary life function for an individual within the species. Whether you have children or not doesn't matter. That has no overall net effect on you, your life. We can talk about different, no. Okay? No. I don't care what he says, no. Now, however, continuation life of the species is absolutely critical. The species has, the individuals have to undergo reproduction in order to maintain the species long term. So nonetheless, it falls within a necessary life function, right? Okay. Survival needs of the body. So let's take in that. So we've talked about necessary functions. What are the necessary things I need? All right. So we need nutrients. I've mentioned that for digestion, carbohydrates, not only carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, but we can also talk about vitamins and minerals. These are things that your body has to acquire from outside, okay, in order to maintain viability. Oxygen is another one. Why do we need oxygen? Because the metabolic biochemical processes that undergo within the cells are dependent upon oxygen. That's basically what we are. Not all our organisms are dependent upon oxygen, but humans, yeah, they are. Next is water. As you're going to find out a little bit later, you're basically sacks of mostly water. You're a bag of water. 75, 76-ish, 77% water. Okay? So that means that you have a barrier, your skin, but every time you breathe, you're losing a little bit of water and vapor, and that means, you're urinating during the day, there's feces, you're sweating, you're losing water, okay? You need to keep bringing the water in, right? Now, next is your body temperature, okay? Now, you are what is called a homeotherm. What is that? That means that despite a wide range of temperature, your core body temperature stays within a pretty tight range, 37 centigrade, plus or minus less than a fraction. Okay. Why is that? So that's because your body's biochemical processes, for the most part, are designed to be optimal at that temperature. So your body maintains that temperature. Now, obviously, size, surface, ratios, all of that's critically important. What's going to lose temperature the fastest? The smaller you are. Little mouse has to really expend a lot of energy because it's constantly losing temperature. However, an elephant or a dinosaur, depending if it's a large one, doesn't, or well, okay? Because that surface to mass ratio is quite different. However, nonetheless, they all have to replace lost temperature, all right? So your body temperature is regulated as a homeotherm. That means we won't go into many details in this class, but it's interesting how that happens. Now, that contrasts to a picotherm. What's a picotherm? A picotherm is a turtle, a frog, a snake, a salamander, a lizard, etc. This means that these organisms are dependent upon their environment to maintain their core body temperature, right? So that means that's why you see that snake or that turtle sunning themselves on a rock or a log in a lake or something. They're out there in the sun warming themselves up. Okay. Next, we have atmospheric pressure. All right, I've already said oxygen's important, right? So when we get into respiration at the end of this series, we will discuss gas laws, we will discuss pressure differences, and we will discuss exchange. But what it boils down to this, in order for you, when you inspire, that's when you're breathing in air, which contains oxygen. In order for that oxygen to enter your body and get into the blood, there has to be a pressure difference. That means it's going down its concentration gradient. That means there has to be more oxygen out here than in here. Okay? If I reverse that, it's going to be the other way. And I'm not going to be able to take in oxygen, and eventually I'll run out of oxygen and I will die. Okay? So atmospheric pressure is critical. All right? So perfect example. You're sitting here in this room. This room, where we're at here in Pennsylvania, Southwest Pennsylvania, here in Pittsburgh, we're around 750 feet above sea level. That's essentially sea level. Don't worry about it. Okay? So that means that no problem. The atmospheric pressure is fine. Now, let's go up 12,000 feet, 13,000 feet in an airplane. Everyone, most of us have ridden in an airplane. It's pressurized, right? Why is it pressurized? Because when you get that far off the surface of the Earth, the partial pressure for oxygen is below that what's in your body. So that means that you can't breathe. You can't bring in oxygen. So that's why they pressurize the cabin of the airplane. They have to maintain that atmospheric pressure, right? And we'll get into the details later. So these are the survival needs of the body. Okay? Now, let's get toward the homeostatic part. What are the factors within the internal environment of your body that must be maintained? All right? So, concentration of nutrient molecules, fats, amino acids, etc. Concentration of O2 and CO2. I mean, they're critical, so we need to be measuring these variables, and we have to maintain these variables in order to maintain life processes. We have concentration of waste products, which is just as important. And let's say for waste products, let's think about that's only one of the roles of the kidney. The kidney is there to remove excess water, excess salts, and toxic things. Right? You had a hamburger, a meat hamburger, I don't care what, protein-based hamburger. Now, one of the things that as you're, well, not so much that, but as tissues in your body are being degraded, proteins are broken down, and the first product of the metabolism of proteins is something called ammonia. Okay? Everybody knows what ammonia is, right? It's a cleaning agent. It is, if you faint, that's what the little glass globules, they break and you sniff it and you wake up. All right? Now, it's extremely toxic. Extremely toxic. So the body detoxifies it or makes it less toxic. So that ammonia goes to the liver, and the liver converts that to uric acid, okay? Urea. And urea contains those nitrogen aspects of that degraded protein, but it's in less toxic form. Now, if we have so much of it, we still got to get rid of it. How do we get rid of it? It goes out in the urine, which means it has to be filtered through the kidney. All right. So the kidney plays a critical role in removal of wastes. So it filters blood, removes the waste. They don't get returned to the blood, and that's fine. All right. You do not have a functional kidney. So you've had chronic kidney disease and your kidneys are no longer functioning. They will, in order for you to survive, you have two options. The first option is they put you on an artificial kidney machine. And that's basically a glorified dialysis machine, and that filters your plasma. And that removes everything, but it doesn't put anything back. We'll get into the details when we get to the urinary system. All right? And that you can be on that machine for about 5 years. The next and the final option is a transplant, a kidney transplant. Without one of those two things, you're not going to live very long. Because the kidney that is a basic function that you cannot live without, right? Okay, so that's CO2, O2, waste products, pH. Again, biochemistry class. There are all these combinations of chemical reactions occurring in your body. Those are designed to occur at what? Optimal temperatures, optimal pHs. Most of those are occurring in the body at a neutral pH, a pH 7.2 to 7.4, right? However, depending on what process I'm talking about and what organ I'm talking about, say for instance in the stomach, things in the lumen of the stomach the chemical reactions are targeted at an acid pH, not a neutral pH, right? So pH is important. Also, the concentrations of water, salt, other electrolytes. Salt, think about that. That's chloride and sodium. Potassium is also important. When we get to the last of this series and we're talking about membrane potential, you will understand the critical role of maintaining a proper concentration both in and out of the cell for two ions, sodium and potassium, right? And hence they have to be regulated. Temperature, I've already talked about that. And then volume and pressure. Volume and pressure, not only gas, but fluids. Okay? So all of these are homeostatically regulated. Okay, next thing. What are the organ systems of the body? I'm going to cover them all. The integument system, which is this lower left here, that's your skin, that's your outer boundary. That I'll emphasize. It's not that it isn't important, but I will not spend much time on it. Next to that, over here, we have the immune system, the nervous system, the endocrine system. We'll say this is the reproductive system. Going up top on the left-hand side, circulatory, digestive, respiratory, urinary, skeletal, and skeletal muscular system. All right. Now, all of those that I've talked about just now, all of those, it doesn't matter whether you are a male or female of a human species. You've all got kidneys, you've all got lungs, etc. There can be size differences, but functional differences, they're minimal. Okay. The big difference is in reproduction. And the male and the female, because of the way we sexually reproduce. The sperm has to be created in the male. It has to be delivered to the female reproductive tract. That needs to be developed. And then ultimately, if there's fertilization of an ovum, development of the fetus, delivery of the fetus, nurturing the fetus. In other words, there is distinct physiological differences between the male and the female. but only in reproduction. Everything else, basically the same. Whether the heart comes from a male or a female, aside from size differences, there's nothing obvious that I can point to say, that's a female heart. That is a male heart. All right. Oh, so what do they do? What are these systems? What are they doing? So the circulatory system is pumping blood through the body. That means it is the transport system for the body. That it transports all kinds of stuff. Oxygen, CO2, water, nutrients, waste materials, communication molecules. That's why it's the transport. And we have to have that. No. So within your body, every cell in your body, with the exception of cartilage, is within 50 microns of a vascular supply. All right. Let's move on down. Digestive system. We've already discussed that. This is how you acquire nutrients. Dropping on down, respiratory system, air exchange, gas exchange, O2, CO2. O2 coming into the body, CO2 leaving the body. Dropping on down, urinary system. We've already talked, I gave you an example. So it has multiple functions. We've just been talking about filtration, but it has other functions. We'll get into the details toward the end of the semester. We have the skeletal system. I've introduced it as an internal structural device, but it also has a lot of complex physiological functions, again, that we may not normally think about, but we'll get there when we get to that system. We have the muscular system. There are 3 types of muscles in your body. Skeletal muscles make the huge bulk of those. Those are what you can actually see. Then you have a single cardiovascular muscle, that's your heart. And then you have something called smooth muscle cells, which are associated with smooth tubular type structures, like say blood vessels. All right. So basically, when we talk about skeletal system, we're primarily focused on the skeletal muscle system. Next, integument, that's the skin. The immune system, this is designed to protect you against foreign invaders. These are microorganisms, by example, that want to eat you. Their job is to keep that from happening. They also have a job of removing dead cells in your body or aberrant cells in your body, so they protect from inside and from outside. And then we have the nervous system, which is the first communication system in the body, which we'll talk about. And then the second one is the endocrine system. So in terms of the nervous system, we think about that as being electrical communication. And we tend to think about the endocrine system as chemical communication. However, as you're going to find, it's not that simple. It's a lot more complex because you only have electrical communication within a cell. Within a cell, so within a neuron. If we want to go from neuron A to neuron B, we have to convert an electrical signal to a chemical signal in order to communicate the next cell downstream. Once I move into the chemical, I'm now actually, that's endocrine. All right, but we'll discuss those details later. Both systems are critical. Without them, all the cells can't talk to each other, right? And lastly, the reproductive system, which I've already talked about. See, these are all the systems in the body. All right, so when you look at your physiological textbook or your anatomy textbook, you see everything's divided into systems. Who did that? Who came up with that designation? Well, it came up historically over the decades, over the century, well, not even centuries, but say the last 100 years or so, that things were divided into these systems. We're humans, and what we do is we need to put things in specific little categories. It helps us understand them, right? So we need to label shit. So that's basically what these systems are. It's our attempt to break down the human body into these component systems, which we can focus on, exclude everything else to better understand that, and then see how they're tied together. So all of these systems are man-made labels, It's not when you do an anatomy lesson. There isn't a little tag on your heart that says heart, stomach, say a specific muscle or something like that. No, we are naming them. All right. And the whole point of naming them is so that we can begin to understand them and then how they can potentially function. So my point is this. Your body is a composite of all these trillions of cells. You function as an individual unit. But what enables that functioning as an individual unit is that all the pieces have to work together as an integrated set of units. So human nature is to break things down so we can talk about them. But what I also want you to do is not lose sight that this is an artifice. It's not fixed in stone, all right? And there is a lot of overlap between these systems. And you want that because they have to communicate. So when we talk, for instance, let's say we talk about a bone, the skeletal system. I told you that cells within your body, with the exception of cartilage, are within 50 microns of a vascular supply. So if I'm talking about, say, my humerus here, my humerus is a lot bigger than 50 microns, right? So in order for me to maintain this large tissue, I have to have a vascular supply. So the circulatory system is integrated into my skeletal system, into the bones. Oh, well, what about the neurons, nerve system? So this large tissue has blood vessels, it has nerves. I can take this biceps muscle. It's got nerves, it's got a vasculature in order to maintain this large tissue. So automatically that means a muscle contains elements of other systems. So it's helpful to divide these into systems, to discuss them, to discuss functionality, but I also want you to appreciate that there's a lot of this going. There is this integration across systems. Okay? Now, I told you that I was not going to insist that you learn anatomy. Let me correct that here. In anatomy, we don't just talk about form. We also talk about location. Okay? So when I'm talking about if you have a physician who's looking at you and examining you, and they're going to say, well, it hurts. Where does it hurt? It hurts here. If I'm talking about that I can't go around and say, this is where it hurts. If I'm communicating by words, I have to be more exact. Where is this? Okay. So anatomy also consists of a large number of location terms. Okay. Now, I'm only going to, this is just a minuscule number of those terms. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, you can multiply this times 10. Okay. So they can tell you exactly where this bone is or an injury to that bone within the aspect of the human by using these anatomic location terms. I'm only introducing these few here because they're going to be critical, because you will not see a quiz or an exam question where I'm going to ask you to spit this stuff back to me. I don't care about that. But from this moment on, through the rest of the semester, I will utilize these anatomic words, location terms, and I expect you to know it. Okay? I will ask questions on quizzes, on homeworks, or exams, and I will use this terminology, and I expect you to know it, right? And I'm not asking a lot, and let's go through them because they're fairly obvious, all right? So let's start at the top. We have two terms, superior and inferior. Superior means to head, inferior means toward feet. Head, feet, superior, inferior. Okay, easy to understand. Dropping on down, we also have anterior and posterior. This is, again, top, bottom. Anterior is to the front, posterior is to the back. Anterior, posterior. Superior, inferior, right? Then we go down here, medial and lateral. So the body, the human body, there's a medial line that goes down, bisects the body like this. It's an imaginary line. This is the medial line. If you have medial, that means toward this central line. If we have lateral, that means away from this central line. Pretty straightforward. Dropping on down, we have something called intermediate. You have 4 sets of limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs normally, okay? So if we have my arm, there's intermediate, that means toward the midline of your arm or your leg. Then if we go down here, proximal, distal, these are 2 critical parts. So let's take my humerus here. Here's my humerus. So it'll be important in a lot of, and I will use this in the semester, throughout the semester. And if I want to talk about the humerus furthest away from my main body, this is called the distal humerus. This is called the proximal humerus. So I don't care what the muscle is, what the bone is. It can be talked about where, what, and where I put it as an aspect, I can say, this is the part furthest away from the body, this is the part closest to the body. Distal, proximal, all right? I will use this extensively through the rest of the semester. The last thing that then we'll want to talk about is how deep you are in the body. Superficial means that you're on the skin or you're just below the skin. So I have a superficial laceration, a scrape, a scratch, and that's on the surface. I have a deep stab wound. That means I go well beyond the depth of the skin and go actually into the body, and maybe I compromise tissues or vasculature. Okay? Superficial, deep. I'll use those terminologies a lot too. So again, these anatomical location terms are critical not only for anatomy, but when we're talking about physiological terms. So, and physiological functions. So I will use those through the semester. All right. Now, this is you. This is a simplified version of a human body. All right. It's basically a sack of mostly water with tubes through it. Okay. So here is the integument, the skin. So everything that is yellow is inside the body. So I'm using this schematic to introduce several concepts. So what is inside the body? What is outside the body? Only, I repeat, only this what you see here, the yellow, this is inside the body. These cells are inside the body. This is blood, so that blood is inside the body. But here's your gastrointestinal tract. That begins with your mouth and ends with your anus. It's a long interconnected tube. Anything within the luminal aspect of that gastrointestinal tract, I don't care if it's in your mouth or in your rectum, it doesn't matter. It's technically outside your body. Okay? So, wait a minute. You say, I ingested, I ate breakfast. It entered my body. No, it didn't. It entered that tubular structure. It has to cross the epithelial layer that defines this gastrointestinal tract before I can say it entered my body. All right? So that's the first concept. The next one up here, let's talk about your respiratory system. The gases that are in the luminal aspect of your trachea and your alveoli, aspects of your lungs, until they cross the epithelial layer and enter, they have not entered your body. They're outside your body. By the same token, let's drop down here. These are your kidneys, the urinary system. When the kidneys filter plasma it is now called a tubular filtrate. Technically, if it is not returned back into the body, it is excluded as urine, so it is outside the body. So anything that is in the luminal space of the gastrointestinal tract, the luminal space of the respiratory system, the luminal space of the tubules and ureter, bladder, etc., of the urinary system, they are outside the body. Okay? And I will reinforce that as I move through systems, right? So, again, this is a structural. Let's talk about function. Again, your respiratory system is gas exchange. Digestive system is associated here with the gastrointestinal tract. Blood circulation within your vasculature, and then filtration as kidney part of the urinary system. And then, what you see here, I haven't talked about this, but we've only talked about filtration, right? The kidney does three specific functions. It filtrates, and then it reabsorbs, and then it secretes. So an example, so when you're put on a dialysis machine, basically an artificial kidney, what it does, it filters the plasma. Anything that crosses that filter membrane is lost. It's not returned. That means when you're undergoing a procedure, they won't let you leave until you drink lots of liquids, eat some sweet cookies, etc., because all of that water, all of that sugar, it's gone along with the wastes, because it's just a size exclusion membrane. Anything below a certain molecular weight, it's gone forever. Okay? However, in your kidney, it's a lot more complex than that. So we'll get into the details later, but in a 24-hour period, two functional kidneys, they are filtering 200 liters of plasma in a 24-hour period. Now, well, how much blood do I got in my body? Okay, you've got, let's round it off, keep it simple, 5 liters of blood. 50% of that, really crudely, is plasma. So that's 2.5 liters of plasma. All right? So, well, wait a minute. It's not like I'm drinking 200 liters of replacement liquids, right? I mean, you're maybe drinking a couple of liters of water a day, maybe 3 or 4 liters a day, whatever, okay? You're not consuming 200 liters. So that means there's repeated filtration. In order to enable repeated filtration, there has to be reabsorption of that filtrate. So that's a critical component of that 200 liters of filtered plasma. All of it's reabsorbed, keeping the numbers simple, but about, say, let's say round you off to your total 24-hour urinary volume is, let's say, a liter. Okay? So that is a minuscule amount compared to what is actually filtered by the kidney. So the kidney is a lot more complex than what we've been able to design from a biomedical standpoint. All right? Now, the next thing is secretion. Filtration is size dependent. If it's small enough, it's going to get filtered. Okay? But wait a minute. What if, two things. Number one, what if it's too big to be filtered? Well, I can secrete it. That's the way I can overcome that. And you don't know what secretion is. We'll talk about it later. Or maybe I need to get rid of more than I can filter alone, so I need secretion there. And secretion is just an additional mechanism where I can remove it from the blood and put it in the tubular filtrate, which ultimately can become urine. All right? So this is a schematic diagram of you, right? Now, I told you earlier today, your sac is mostly water. I want to introduce with this slide a series of terminologies. Again, these are important. I'm not necessarily going to ask you specifically to differentiate between them, but I will use this terminology through the rest of the semester. So you might as well know it. Okay, so let's walk through it. You're a sac of mostly water. So that means that we can say all the water in your body is your total body water. Okay? That is the only in blue. Remember, If you're in the tubular filtrate, if you're in the gastrointestinal tract, if you're in the respiratory tract, you are outside the body. It is not blue, it's orange. Only the blue part is considered inside the body. Now, unless you're getting a colonoscopy, your gastrointestinal tract is full of stuff. And a lot of that's water. But that's excluded from your total body water estimate. Okay? So your total body water, all right, that's around 42 liters. Okay? A lot of water. Now let's subdivide that total body water. The first division is basically cellular or extracellular. Is the water inside a cell? And remember, you got 75 trillion of them. I don't care if they're 10 microns or bloody small. You got trillions of them. So that's a lot of volume. Or is it outside the cells? That's extracellular. So your total your body water is first divided in either inside a cell or outside a cell. Okay? So if you think about that, your intracellular water is around 28 liters. That's a huge volume. The extracellular water is only about 14, so it's about half that. So again, yeah, let's say our average cell size is 10 microns in diameter, assuming a sphere is the smallest shape, a simplest shape. But when we multiply that times trillions, it comes out to be a large volume. Okay, so most of the water inside your body is in cells. Now, of that extracellular water, it can be two places. It can be circulating as blood and plasma in blood, or it can be between cells outside of the blood. Okay, so we call that plasma. That's the liquid component of blood. Or it can be interstitial, which means not in the cells and not in the blood. Okay? So the terminology that I expect all of you to know is intracellular or extracellular, plasma or interstitial water. Okay? And their particular distributions. Now, if I was to ask you without you've seen this, but if I didn't let you see this and I could say, where is most of the extracellular water? You would probably say blood, because if I cut myself, I'm bleeding. I can see the water, okay? But that's not actually true. Most of the water, most of the extracellular water is not contained in plasma, but actually in the interstitial compartment. That's all the spaces between cells, excluding the circulatory system, right? So I do expect you to understand these concepts, and I will use them as we go forward. Okay? All right. So let's now move into control systems, because that's basically all physiology is. It's all control systems. Those of you who are coming from an ECE background, you know what I'm talking about. All right? Only trouble is you've been at it for 100, 200-ish years. Nature's done it billions of years ago. All right? So, and we're still learning the details of control systems. Okay? Now, let me introduce this for the class in general. Right? So, as I've already discussed, we have to have homeostasis. That means we have to have a variable. The variable has to be measured, and it has to be controlled. So that's a control system in its simplicity. So basically, and let me give you some examples. Some of those, let's go outside of the body. Electrical systems, electronics, mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, all of these are control systems. Okay? They can all be control systems. Now, basically, we have to have a variable, and it has to be measured, and then it has to be that variable has to be controlled. And there has to be something to control it. Then there has to be something that controls that control, that is changes. So you have a variable, you have to have a receptor, you have to have a control center, and then you have to have some form of effector that can change that variable. Now, I don't care whether I'm talking a mechanical control system, like HVAC system, or some system in your body. They all have the same basic fundamental aspects, right? So, the thing about control systems is that there is error. And that's where we get this dynamic equilibrium. All right. So I like to use this as a simplistic example. You're driving along. You're in Ohio. All right. And you're going from west to east. All right. So you're in central Ohio. It's fairly flat, right? So you got your foot on the accelerator. You're going a constant speed. Let's say you're going 60 miles per hour, right? Now you're getting toward the Hocking Hills in eastern Ohio, and it gets a little elevation going up. Now, in order to maintain that 60 miles per hour, what's going to happen is if you don't change the amount of gas you're putting into the carburetor, your speed's going to go down because inertia. Okay? So in order to maintain your speed, you're going to now put your foot on the pedal, more gas goes to the carburetor, RPMs go up, we bring our speed back up. There's delays. Number one, you're not paying attention. You didn't realize that you hit the hills until you start slowing down. That means that there's going to be a greater delay before you get back up to 60 miles per hour. All right. And that those error signals can be, when did you start changing? If you've ever been in the mountains, either especially out west, but even in the central part of the state, and you're on the interstate, you're behind some big truckers in a semi-truck, they know that there's a hill coming up and they start to accelerate before they hit the hill because they know they're going to lose miles per hour. So they want to maintain their speed. So they have to have much greater speed so that as they slow down, they can compensate. All right. And the same thing for you. So there is error. There is error in sensing the change. There is error. You have to then, process it up here. That has to translate to putting increased pressure on the pedal. That's a mechanical device that then goes to open up a valve delivering more gas to the carburetor. That then translates to valves going up and down. That then gets translated to the spinning of the axle, and that then translates. So there's all these little steps, and that's error. Each one of those can't occur simultaneously. They're all contributing to error. So that's why we talk in terms of dynamic equilibrium. All right. So you can't just maintain a flat 60 miles per hour under these varying conditions. Right? So how do we present control systems? So we'll start with this one. This is about as simple as you can get. This is basically an HVAC system. This one, it works off of a furnace, not an air conditioning. The thing to remember, might as well introduce it here, is that a control system effector can only go in one direction. Let me be clear, using the HVAC system. You have a thermostat, you have a control system, but you have two types of effectors. So you either have an air conditioning unit, which is designed to do only one thing, is to reduce room temperature because it creates cold temperatures. Or you have a heating unit, which increases temperatures because it increases heat. You do not combine the two. We do not have a device that does simultaneously both. You have a separate heating unit, a separate cooling unit. So what you have to do at the seasonal change here, coming up in about a month, this will be changed from an air conditioning going to controlling air conditioning to controlling a furnace. Okay? So the first thing you need to think about is that the controls can only go in one direction, right? So what do you mean? So now let's think about that. So we have a reduction in temperature. that means that sets this thermostat is designed so that below a certain temperature, it's going to signal through a circuit that's going to engage the furnace. It's going to start putting out, it's going to start warming the room. Okay? And then at some point it will shut down. Why does it do that? Because we don't want to overshoot. Okay? There's slop, there's inefficiency. So there's delays, etc. So the range, there's going to be an operating temperature range. And it's dictated by a number of different variables. It don't matter what they are. But what it is it's maintaining that room temperature within a range. Okay? Now, what keeps me from overshooting is that once I've achieved my target temperature, the thermostat control system shuts everything off. That keeps me from overshooting too much. Okay? So that we call negative feedback. Okay? So that means that the whole purpose of negative feedback is once I achieve my variable preset value of my variable, whatever it is, I don't want to overshoot it appreciably, so I need to stop effecting that changed variable. All right? Now, let's translate that into physiological terms. A physiological control system, what we talk about is the variable. This can be everything from glucose levels in the blood, respiratory rate, blood pressure, doesn't matter. Okay? Then basically that's the variable which is being maintained in this state of homeostasis, dynamic equilibrium. Now, we have to be able to, the first critical component to a control system is some way of measuring that variable. If we can't measure it, we can't control it. So there has to be some sensor, some receptor that measures that variable. In the case of blood pressure, there are baroreceptors in your circulatory system that measures blood pressure directly. All right? We can buy a pressure sensor, but your body makes them. The cells, they actually serve as baroreceptors. What about glucose levels? Those are measured in your pancreas. And they're measuring those glucose levels. So there are sensors, receptors that are measuring that variable. Then you have a control center which will make decisions based on changes in that variable. If it's designed to, again, remember, a variable can only be controlled in one direction by a set effector. Okay? Heating units can't cool, cooling units can't heat. Right? So basically, you need a control center that is going to measure a change, and depending on how it's set up, it will then instigate an effector that will then elicit a change in that variable, which will then approach whatever that preset value is, and then once it gets there, it tends to stop stimulating that effector, and so we stop stimulating an increase or a decrease in whatever that variable may be, right? So those are physiological homeostatic controls. This, no. This, no. I can tell you right now, from this day to the end of the semester, I will be giving you multiple examples of homeostatic control systems. Because that's all the body is. Okay? So you might as well memorize this part now. Okay? Now, one more thing before I let you go. So we have two types of control systems that we talk about in the body. One is called intrinsic and one is called extrinsic. These are usually thought about in concept within or out within a tissue or an organ. So if a control system, 100%, that's all the aspects of the control system, the variable, this control center, the effector, if everything is contained within that organ, its measured changes are explicitly limited to that organ, that is called an intrinsic control or local control. If any element of that control system is something outside of that organ, we call that an extrinsic control. Okay? So intrinsic, extrinsic. As we go through the semester, I will give you examples of both of these for all the system, or most of the systems in the body. All right. Now, next, negative and positive feedback. So negative feedback, I've already given you an example, the HVAC system. As the temperature achieves its preset temperature, we cease to stimulate that effector to either decrease or increase temperature. Okay? So that's negative feedback. All right? So negative feedback is designed to maintain homeostasis within a system. All right? Or a physiological state. So whether it's blood pressure, I don't care. Now, what about positive feedback? What's positive feedback? All right. So I'm going to make it simple. It can be a little challenging to appreciate positive feedback, but positive feedback means that as I stimulate, as I deliver an effector, which is going to say increase a variable, that does not have negative, it has the opposite effect. So that stimulates yet more effector to stimulate more variable. Then that means more variable and more variable. But wait a minute, that's not homeostasis because you're not maintaining a certain variable. That's because here's the way I want you to think about a positive feedback. Negative feedback is critical to maintain homeostasis, right? That means it maintains within a physiological state, whatever that may be. The purpose of a positive feedback is to enable you to transition from physiological state A to physiological state B. So it's transitioning across physiological states. Okay? So that is the way I want you to think about negative and positive feedback. Negative feedback maintains a physiological state, normal blood pressure. Positive feedback allows you to go from one physiological state to the next. I will give you more examples, but I've got 3 minutes. I'll give you a really quick one relating to blood. So homeostasis, I've got these baroreceptors. They're maintaining blood pressure, okay? It goes up and down, up and down. All right? You cut yourself. You're cutting up vegetables for this evening's dinner. You cut yourself. You're starting to bleed. All right. So what happens? I mean, you didn't cut your finger off, but you cut it and it's bleeding. And then eventually it stops because it's clotting. And we'll talk about the details later, but that's not the point. The point is this. You got a hole. Blood is escaping. You're losing blood. This is not a good outcome. If it isn't rectified, you're going to die because you lose enough blood. So what your body does, it stops the bleeding. So basically, physiological state 1 is there's a hole and you're losing blood. I do not want to maintain homeostasis. I want to stop the sucker from bleeding. So I want to transition from a bleeding state to non-bleeding state. In other words, I want to plug the hole. And that's where the clotting comes in. I'm losing blood, not losing blood. 2 completely different physiological states. I want positive feedback there, right? Okay, with that, I'm out of time. You got 1 minute plus 10 minutes to get to seminar if that's where you're headed. I will see everybody next Tuesday, okay? All right, everyone.
Question?
Yes.
I emailed you.
Yes, I got it. I just haven't had a chance to respond.
Got it. No problem. Thank you.
Yep, of course.